What in the actual
After my last Civil War video caused a civil war in the comments section, I figured I'd try to capitalise and expand on some of the lore I dropped in that video. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the Empire specifically, and while I will be bringing up lore that I dropped in the last video, you don't need to watch that video to understand this one. I'll be covering the current state of the Empire, what advantages and disadvantages they have over the Stormcloaks, and why you should or shouldn't pick them the next time you decide to slog through the Civil War questline. And don't worry Stormcloak fans, if this does well, you'll get a video too. Let's start with some groundwork first, because the Empire in Skyrim is in a vastly different place from where we left it in Oblivion. It's got a different aesthetic, a new dynasty, and it has shrunk. Like a lot. While under the Septims, the Third Cyrodiilic Empire was a fully continental one that had everyone involved. This was never really the case with the Medes, and now it's basically just Cyrodiil, Hierarch and half of Skyrim. But how did it come to this? When we left Okato in Oblivion, the Empire was damaged, but still together. Well, Okato got assassinated. We don't know by who, probably the Thalmor, but once he was killed, it caused the Empire to fracture in a big way and expedited the leaving of many provinces. The big three were Blackmarsh, the Somerset Isles, and Elsewhere. Blackmarsh had a bunch of steroid-using lizard super soldiers to deal with the Daedra during the crisis, at least according to good old Argonian propaganda, and decided that they didn't need the Empire anymore. The Thalmor, allegedly, saved the day in the Somerset Isles by taking charge of the defence of the Crystal Tower, where the Outmer made their last stand against the Daedra, and apparently closed a few Oblivion gates. They could have also killed the people who actually did that and took credit, because these lot are expert fraudsters, which we'll get into later. But either way, they grew in prominence from this, eventually making the Thalmor the leading power in the Somerset Isles. We don't know when Elsewhere left, but it was sometime between 0 and 115 of the 4th era, most likely around the time of the Void Knights, in year 98 of the 4th era. Now we know that part of Okato's rule was dedicated to keeping Morrowind in the Empire, especially after the Red Year, but the province had ceased to be an imperial province at some point around 48 of the 4th era. Even if Okato had lived, the Empire wasn't going to be the same force it was when a Septim sat on the throne, but the second he did die, all the issues got exasperated. Cyrodiil broke up into individual regions again. Skyrim and Hierarch looked at each other like their soon-to-be divorced parents were fighting, and Hammerfell couldn't be bothered, and left the Empire. The Septims were gone, Okato was gone, and all that was left was squabbling warlords. One of these warlords was a better tactician than the rest, and Titus Mede, through a series of quite frankly ridiculous military victories, which included taking the imperial city with 1,000 men, somehow, eventually took to the throne. If you want to know more about the Chad that Titus Mede I is, who isn't the same guy we get in Skyrim, I have a video here. All you need to know for this video is that Titus stitched Cyrodiil back together, convinced Hammerfell to join back in, and let Skyrim and Hierarch back into the foster home that was his empire. Unfortunately, by the time he did sit on the throne and establish his rule, this was all that would stay in his empire for the long term. While Valenwood, Morrowind and Elsewhere were technically part of the empire at this point in time, this wouldn't be the case for much longer. A Thalmor-backed coup saw Valenwood join the Somerset Isles and leave the empire to form the Third Aldmeri Dominion, the continental rival of the Mede Dynasty. Morrowind was basically already doing its own thing, so leaving the empire, especially because the province had the worst time ever at the start of the 4th era, was always bound to happen, considering that Morrowind didn't get all that much aid from the empire. Ultimately, what was left was a shell, and while Titus was clever enough to brand this empire as a continuation of the third one, founded by Talos, we reach our first checkpoint in whether or not to be a part of this faction. Now I want to make this clear, the Mede Dynasty is not the Septim one, and that should affect the people it rules. You have to realise that the Septims were the descendants of a god, Talos, who are chosen to rule by another god, Akatosh, who also decided the rulers of the lineages of all three Cyrodiilic empires. The Medes are just the guys who won at picking up the pieces, hence why everyone is so keen to leave. Culturally, religiously, even ethically, there's no reason the Mede should be in charge, other than that they are the best for the job, because of all the ambitious warlords, their ancestor won. As we will soon see, the Medes are questioned far more easily than the Septims, because they lack the divine right their predecessors had, and with it the divine fear. Another problem is the theme that the Medes kinda don't do anything when they're in charge. They're very passive, and the Third Aldmeri Dominion gets stronger right under their noses while they get weaker. The Thalmor-backed coup in Valenwood is one example, since the Bosmer were under Imperial rule at the time, and if the Empire backed the ruling government at the time more aggressively, they could have prevented the coup from happening or tried to otherwise keep Valenwood from leaving through force. In the period between the Septims and Medes, the Empire didn't lift a finger to help Morrowind when it got invaded by Blackmarsh, and of all places, Skyrim, seemingly independent of the Empire, gifted Solstheim to the Dunmer and allowed refugees to come to Windhelm and Winterhold. This might not have been needed if the Empire had aided the Dunmer, whether it be against the Argonians or to provide aid to refugees, and hadn't appeared so indifferent to its vassal country's woes, which eventually led to Morrowind leaving well into Mede's rule. While keeping Morrowind a part of the Empire was more feasible than Valenwood, a lack of urgency is what helped the Third Aldmeri Dominion grow in power, and is what led to the near loss during the Great War. You see, when we fast forward a few years to Titus Mede II, he's facing an Aldmeri Dominion with Valenwood, the Somerset Isles, and Elsewhere. We know that Elsewhere was once part of the Empire, although we aren't sure whether they were neutral during the Void Nights. Those cats did have a rough time of it though when the moons disappeared. You see, they rely on the moons for their Furstock, which are practically their forms, and they are a massive part of Khajiit culture. When Secunda and Massa eventually reappeared, being the premier fraudsters that they are, took credit, making the Khajiit love the Altmer, while the Empire, seemingly, didn't do much to dispute this. When the Main, the leader of Elsewhere, was assassinated, with some sources saying that it was probably the Thalmor, causing a civil war that split Elsewhere into Anaquenya and Palatine, the Empire seemed to just sit on its hands again. These countries then became vassals to the Aldmeri Dominion, again making the Dominion even stronger right under the Empire's noses. Given how much the Aldmeri Dominion had grown, you would have thought that Titus Mede would have been better prepared for when the Great War started, but the passive nature shown by the Mede Dynasty throughout their history meant they weren't really ready for the Great War. Now the Great War lasted 5 years, and by the end of it the Imperial City was taken, while Hammerfell was fighting for its life. Rather logically, while sitting in the smouldering streets of the Imperial City, the Aldmeri Dominion thought they had won, only for Titus Mede to pull a fast one and bring the brunt of his army to bear during the Battle of the Red Ring, recapturing the Imperial City, which I cover more in the first Civil War video. All you really need to know is that this was the most important battle in the Mede Empire's history, and had they not won it, the Thalmor would have basically won the Great War. It was a genius play to preserve the Imperial army for this battle's victory, but at the same time it was a sacrifice play and a desperate one at that. The Imperial City, the Empire seat of power, got sacked, and the gods only know what atrocities the Dominion committed against the city's people. So many factors were in play during the Battle of the Red Ring that, had any one of them gone against the Empire that day, such as the arrival of an unnamed hero who took the Emperor's place after he was wounded, or if General Yonna's Nordic Legion from Skyrim were late, or if General Tyrchinus' Legion from Hammerfell were even slightly smaller, it could have resulted in a loss, and thus ended in the Empire's destruction. While it was ultimately a victory, it was a dear one, and while many in the Empire wanted to continue the momentum, Titus Mede sued for peace, culminating in the White Gold Concordant. And this is where we get another checkpoint I want to talk about, specifically about Titus Mede II. While Titus Mede showed some of his ancestors' brilliant military mind to snatch a victory from the jaws of defeat, I also think we got some insight into his ruling style. He was dealt a bad hand when he took the throne, with Hammerfell suffering from infighting. He only had the human provinces and a few years before the Great War happened. Still, his actions in the war made one thing clear. He was a man who would resort to the sacrificial play. He sacrificed the people of the Imperial City to give the Empire one last shot, and he showed, through the White Gold Concordant, that he was willing to sacrifice a whole lot more so that he and his Empire could get a do-over for round 2 against the Thalmor. You see, while some in the Empire believed that the war shouldn't have ended, since they finally got some momentum, the truth was that they had suffered more than the Dominion. From what I can tell, the Imperial forces were defending from the get-go, and trying to sue for peace was the right play to buy time and actually be ready for another war. The problem was how sacrificial Titus Mede was, and how it led to the Empire weakening even further. When the Thalmor came to the negotiation table, they pressed on the front foot, like the war, and the terms that came out made it seem like the Empire basically bent over backwards for them. The two major sections were taking land from Hammerfell and the banning of Talos worship. These terms were only bad news, and the people of Hammerfell refused to give land to the Thalmor, and since they kept fighting, they became independent from the Empire for the sake of a peace treaty. The Red Guards even technically won, managing to get the Thalmor to leave them alone, at least for the short term. Still, if you're the Empire, losing another nation before you're gearing up for another war is not a great play, especially with a nation that has as rich a military history as Hammerfell, which they demonstrated when they forced the Aldmeri Dominion into a stalemate. Then we have the Talos worship ban, causing massive issues in Skyrim specifically, and given that the Empire was founded by Titus Septim, I'm willing to bet it also caused issues throughout Cyrodiil. Even if you ignore Skyrim, the Empire is not unified in Cyrodiil. We know this for a fact because someone within the Empire's council gets the Dark Brotherhood to kill Titus Mede II, but we'll get into that later. For now, I need you to understand the history of the Empire leading up to this point, and why it is in the state that it is. This isn't the same Empire that ruled the continent, it's a dwindling Empire hanging on to power by the skin of its teeth, which eventually leads us to where we're at in Skyrim. So let's actually look at the Skyrim Civil War and how the Empire's history leading up to this point factors in. Well, right after this halftime meme break.
You look like an angry little boy. Don't presume to tell me what I need.
Forgive my sister. What she lacks in diplomacy, she
Do
makes...
shut up, dear. Anything from you? No. Good. Let the grown women speak.
So, after the Talos ban and some Ulfric hijinks, we have a civil war on our hands. This immediately shows off the Mede Dynasty's flaws, which I've mentioned beforehand. One is how sacrificial Titus Mede II is, since he sacrificed Talos worship and allowed Thalmor to move around freely in his provinces, which led to the civil war in the first place. The second flaw is the neglect. It seems like the Empire is trying to tame the civil war with as few resources as possible. And this is where I do want to credit Tullius here. Were it not for Alduin in Helgen, he would have had the war won with the few soldiers he was allowed. But after Ulfric escapes and the civil war is back underway, he is denied more soldiers from Cyrodiil, despite the fact that Ulfric's forces are getting larger. We know this because of a report from Rickard, claiming that Ulfric has now amassed enough men to take Whiterun after Helgen. Sure, the Empire is gearing up for a war of its own, but its legions have many Nords, and these Nords have been instrumental in the past, like the Battle of the Red Ring. So allowing this conflict to continue is not great for anyone. The easy answer is to give Tullius, who has done a solid job thus far, more soldiers to quell the rebellion quickly. But the Empire is very Cyrodiil first, and afraid to move soldiers away from the capital to help one of its provinces. Still, I'm aware that I've been ragging on the Empire this entire time, but you have to understand, if the Empire wasn't weak, it wouldn't have been in this situation to begin with. Still, that doesn't mean there aren't a myriad of benefits for Skyrim still being a part of the Empire. Let's cover the logistical benefits first, and the moral ones later since they're more subjective. 1. Skyrim is not a rich country. You can just tell when you go to any of its cities, and the Civil War has only been going on for roughly a year, so more than just the war is contributing to the province's lacking wealth. Markarth is suffering from constant conflicts with the Forsworn, draining away at its mining business. Morthal and Dawnstar are kinda just terrible places to live. Winterhold has collapsed into the sea and shows no sign of recovering. Riften is a crime-ridden skeever hole, and Windhelm has a slum, has a lot of homeless people compared to its regular population, is housing refugees despite not being able to support its own people, and has crime issues. Only Solitude and Whiterun are really benefiting from any kind of wealth, and that's mainly because they're great trade hubs. As a poorer country, Skyrim thus needs trade, and that is what the Empire comes with. It helps the country with food, selling goods, and so on, but being an imperial province also helps with travelling through the Sea of Ghosts, since many islands there are imperial colonies, like Roscria. Another helpful aspect is the numbers provided with the imperial legions. Yes, the Empire has already been pretty battered by the Aldmeri Dominion, but this time, at least theoretically, it will be ready for another war. A lot of Skyrim's fighting force is part of the Legion anyway, and it'll be pretty tough getting all those soldiers to come back home if they go the independent route. But as part of the Empire, numbers are on your side. Of course, there are also logistical issues. You can't worship Talos. That's a pretty big deal, considering that the Empire was founded by the guy. You have the Thalmor randomly kidnapping people like they're the secret police, and the Empire always being Cyrodiil first, so you can get neglected, like with Morrowind, Valenwood and elsewhere, or straight up thrown under the carriage, like with Hammerfell. Because you aren't in charge of your own military, at least the bulk of it anyway, depending on how the war shapes up, there is a chance that the extra numbers won't help Skyrim because all the Imperial legions are fighting in Cyrodiil. While this probably isn't an issue when fighting the Altmer, because of the geography of Skyrim, the Forsworn taking over Markarth during the Great War is an example of this, and will probably happen again if Skyrim enters another Great War under Imperial rule. And now we talk about the moral implications, which I now know from experience is a hot topic. The meat and potatoes of it boils down to whether you think Ulfric is right, and whether you think the Empire is capable of recovering or is destined to die. I don't really want to get into this too much, since you all seem to have made up your minds, morally anyway, but what I do want to say is that I don't believe there should be a way that you think either side is 100% morally right. Both sides are designed to have logistical and moral flaws, so please be open-minded in the comments when thinking about this. Having said that, as far as the Dragonborn is concerned, there is the personal aspect of them executing you because it's more convenient at the time, despite you being entirely innocent. That's pretty messed up. And a lot of you have pointed out that this was enough of a reason for you to shun the Empire. Which is entirely fair. You go against the ones that personally wronged you. Now I want to go into the speculative part about the Empire, since we covered the history, logistics and morals, if a little lightly. First, let's think about what it means if the Dark Brotherhood manages to assassinate Titus Mede II. How does that affect the Empire? Now this all depends on Titus's heirs. We know of at least one, his cousin Vittoria Vici. But she died before he did, so it's not like she's gonna take over the throne after a Tom and Jerry style accident. There's a good chance he has someone else in line, whether it be a son or a daughter, but we don't know for sure. If he doesn't, a potentate probably isn't the greatest thing in this situation. If he has an heir, his death might actually be the biggest sacrifice play of all. You see, he seems to accept his death pretty heartily, and he's quite an old man when you suplex him on the Kataraya. It almost feels like he knows something we don't, and maybe his death will lead to Cyrodiil galvanising under a new face that didn't sign the Empire away with the White Gold Concordant, while benefiting from the time that Titus Mede bought. It could be the resurgence required to win the next Great War. And Amand Mortier, the guy who hires you to kill the Emperor, seems to think that things will get better following his death, and he is very passionate about it. Then again, if Titus Mede II is to be the last of his line, the Thalmor could capitalise on the ensuing confusion around the succession and wipe the Empire off the map. His almost amicable ending could be a resignation to this fate.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter, I give up. Well played, guys.
It feels 50-50 to me. Since we're playing from the perspective of the Dragonborn, I do want to talk about that too, and what siding with the Empire means for them. You see, you are inherently the enemy of the Thalmor, whether you like it or not, and your actions in the main story only amplify that. If you side with the Empire and become a war hero, what does that mean for their relationship with the Thalmor? Would you be the trigger for the next Great War? Would the Empire sell you out to keep the peace going as it did with Hammerfell? You would be an incredibly valuable military asset, but if the Empire isn't ready, would it be willing to lose you as an asset to continue a period of peace? I don't have any answers here because we don't have enough information, but I'll let you decide for yourselves whether the Dragonborn's close association with the Empire is good for it in the long term, at least for the Mede Dynasty. The last thing I want to discuss is more narrative, and if previous world building foretells the fate of the Mede Dynasty. You see, Elder Scrolls world building is cyclical. Anything major has usually happened before, and will happen again, including the world ending. Mundus itself functions on a cycle called the Kalpa, and it has been implied that Alduin has ended the world before. The Empires of Cyrodiil seem to follow a cycle too. All three were founded by a Dragonborn with the aid of gods, endured well when their line had their dragon blood, and the first two fell once the bloodlines ended, with Remen Cyrodiil's empire collapsing with the death of a potentate. This could be the fate of the empire under the Medes, which feels like it's shrinking on the verge of collapse and without the dragon blood. The elves have ruled Tamriel before and perhaps will again. Everything is cyclical after all. Or perhaps the Thalmor repeat the mistakes of the Dwemer, and in trying to play God to rewrite reality, because that's their goal for some reason, they all just vanish, causing their own destruction because that too would be cyclical. If you're optimistic, you could subscribe to the theory that the Dragonborn will rule their own empire, similarly to how their predecessors in the past have appeared in times of chaos to quell Tamriel and form their empires. If that's the case, is it worth joining this empire? Or perhaps the Medes broke the cycle, when the first of them managed to salvage the empire after the death of potentate Okato, and after the death of Titus Mede II, he could herald in a new golden age by defeating the Aldmeri Dominion. It doesn't seem like we're going to find out anytime soon. Thank you for watching this video. It's the longest one I've ever done, and there's a lot of work that's gone into it. There's so much to cover with the Empire, and I've tried to cover most of it here, but I still haven't talked about things like who will rule Skyrim if the Empire will win. Although I'll probably go over that in the Stormcloak video, because as some of you have probably noticed, I haven't really covered their history that much. Either way, I hope you learned something and that you'll like, subscribe and so on. See you soon, and enjoy the run up to Christmas.
The wolves trod upon a great Jovaska to meet the sons of Iskramo. They said, "What are you but a harbinger to leave us hopeless and forlorn?" The wolf bore its fangs and spread its claws and tore at its own hide. "Drink the blood and become my sons, or by dawn you'll never survive." And so the pack was born again as the wolves of Jorvaska, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's bound hunter. And so the pack was born again as the wolves of Jorvaska, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight star.